Does the CIA know that this is a simulation? They do a lot of scientific research into all sorts of weird, wonderful things. And it may surprise you to know that the CIA has investigated the fact that this reality that we call life is actually a virtual reality simulation, like a video game. You know I bleat on about the simulation flipping endlessly. I'm like a broken record of a broken record. Even I get fucking sick of it sometimes. That's why I need to find things that confirm that this is a simulation. You know, like science and stuff. And when we do come across it, it's like, wow, where's this been like all my life? And people send me stuff and comment on my videos and say, look at this, Jack, have you ever read this? And I go, okay, I check it out and I go, bloody hell, I never knew that. And it blows my mind. And I'm like, oh my God, this really is a simulation. Because, you know, even I make the videos about it, but even I sometimes doubt it and go, nah, is it though? Is it really? It feels bloody real, you know, when you do this. Feels real. But what is real? How do you define real? Real could simply be electrical signals interpreted by your brain. And Vice, you know that magazine, it's really terrible. Only reading Vice magazine would be like only eating McDonald's mozzarella sticks for every meal. It's just a nice little joke there, sort of talking about, you know, Vice magazine being like the junk food of journalistic artistic integrity. But they wrote an article and it's entitled How to Escape the Confines of Time and Space According to the CIA. Ooh. And the subheadline reads, in the 1980s, the spy agency investigated the gateway experience technique to alter consciousness and ultimately escape space-time. Here is everything you need to know. I've read it and I'm only going to give you, that's you watching this, the interesting bits and summarise the rest, because there's a lot of fluff in this, and the guy that wrote it, who's called Thierry Champion, thinks they're a bit of an artistic wonder kid, when really they're just a faffy fucking millennial. Quote, the intrigue revolves around a classified 1983 CIA report on a technique called the gateway experience, which is a training system designed to focus brainwave output to alter consciousness and ultimately escape the restrictions of time and space. Shit your fucking pants time. This is bloody interesting. The CIA was interested in all sorts of psychic research at the time, including the theory and applications of remote viewing, which is when someone views real events with only the power of their mind. I've heard about this. I think they do this sort of stuff in Stranger Things. If you've seen that on Netflix, they put kids in, you know, cells and make them do weird shit, psychic phenomena. And you know, science doesn't really like all that sort of stuff, but we know it goes on because the CIA's been doing it. And we, you know, you and me, we all know that the CIA's been into this shit for ages, ever since like World War II, when they got all the German Nazi scientists and made them give them all their secrets and shit, and go and meeting aliens and all that, right, going to the Hollow Earth. So, you know, we all know that happened. It's just how much of it is truth and how much is, you know, made up by mentalists on the internet. You know, that's what we have to decipher. Little joke for you that I wrote in the script. What does a CIA agent do when it's time for bed? He goes undercover. Something in my eye then. Another joke. I had an idea for a movie where a retired CIA agent searches for his daughter in Paris. Turns out the idea was taken. So, I wrote that. Quote, in the 1950s, Robert Monroe, a radio broadcasting executive, begins producing evidence that specific sound patterns have identifiable effects on human capabilities. These include alertness, sleepiness, and expanded states of consciousness. I'm pretty sure there's another one called brown noise that makes you shit your pants as well. Don't know if you've heard about that. Useful. Quote, 1972, a classified report circulates in the US military and intelligence communities. It claims that the Soviet Union is pouring money into research involving ESP and psychokinesis for espionage purposes. Oh my god, good old Soviet Union. Reminds me of an ex-girlfriend actually. She was a communist and a real psycho. Don't know how I missed all those red flags. Right, I'm not going to read the whole lot of this because it's boring. More boring than going fishing. Actually, I say that. When I went fishing last week, I got hooked That's enough of the jokes now. It's getting ridiculous. Anyway, right, this Robert Monroe geezer spends 20 years researching it and made a shitload of money out of writing 4 books and selling cassette tapes about how to hack the Matrix, essentially. I don't think it was called Hack the Matrix. I think it was called something else, right? I don't know what. God, you remember audio cassettes? They had an A side and a B side. So it's pretty logical then that the CD followed it up. A, B, C, D, right? You can have that one. Anyway, that's when the CIA gets involved, when they spot that the Soviet Union is pouring money into research involving ESP and psychokinesis for espionage purposes, because the Americans were like, you know, they hated the commies back then. They are the commies now. No, they're not. I don't know what I'm talking about. Shut up, Jack. You know nothing about politics. No, so yeah, obviously America doesn't like anyone, you know, being better than them, so they have to get in there and do them over. Quote, for the uninitiated, astral projection is mostly interchangeable with the psychophysical phenomena of out-of-body experiences and remote viewing. Another little joke for you. I had my first out-of-body experience today. I was beside myself. Quote, with the right guidance and technologies, astral projectors believe we can train our consciousness to move beyond the confines of the space-time dimension. This super ability frees our human minds to travel through the universe, exploring an endless array of normally imperceptible realities and dimensions. I'm just reminded of the metaverse video that I made quite recently. You know, in Ready Player One, where you know, you jump into the metaverse after he puts the thing on, and you see time and space and the planets and things like that all around, and you take a deep dive through the planets, past the planets, and it kind of makes me think of that if this is a video game, of course you can come out of your body and explore all of the video game at once. It's kind of like exploring the metaverse, like you would in a VR headset. It doesn't really make any sense, but it worked in my head, you know. It's always the same. Anyway, quote, the pattern of the universe conspicuously mirrors the patterns of electrons around the nucleus of an atom. Well, that is interesting, isn't it? Because it's like pixels in a video game, which if you look closely, you can sometimes see. Atoms are very similar to this, as we've already explored. So there's a quote from Neil deGrasse Tyson. Not from him directly, but there's a bit of video which is in one of my videos where he says, he's talking to these quantum physicists, scientists, and he says to them, so the deeper you dig through these electrons and atoms, what do you find? And the guy says, we find code, computer code. Yeah, so computer code is written into every tiny little atom, and I think one day we'll get so far and we'll discover the code that writes this video game. God, imagine if they just switched me off. Shut him up! Stop him talking about this! We've got a lot of money invested in this game. Look at them with their furrowed brows. You can tell I've been watching Bill Hicks. Okay, quote, this is where things get a little slippery. This is where things get a little slippery. Bloody hell, the whole thing's slippery. A slippery dish. Quote, this is where things get a little slippery. Hold on as best you can. The universe is on the whole hologram thing too, Wayne writes. The super hologram is called a torus because it takes the shape of a fuck-off massive self-contained spiral. Ooh, a massive self-contained spiral. That sounds like a double helix. So that bit's rather interesting, right? Because if he's right, it kind of proves our theory that this life is just a video game. Because in a video game, the entire game and world is stored on a disc, which incidentally looks like a bit of a 2D version of a torus, doesn't it? A torus, if you don't know, is like a donut shape, right? And so there's patterns within patterns here. Now maybe it's just apophenia and pareidolia, connecting things that aren't really there, because my brain's very good at that, all brains are very good at that. Pareidolia and apophenia is where you can see a face in the curtains. It's the fear part of our brain spotting patterns in things that aren't necessarily there, because it comes from our days when we lived in the jungle as little cavemen with bear pants on and a little cheetah hat, where we would see a face like a tiger stalking us through the undergrowth, and we would see that and then be able to act on it, right? It's the fear, part of the limbic system, I think, right? Or alternatively, these patterns keep repeating themselves throughout the universe. Now, to me, I think when I look in somebody's eyes, very closely, the shape, the colour and the pattern of a person's eye, specifically the coloured part, looks very, very, very similar to the universe. When you look at the universe through a telescope, when you look at space and it looks very similar, right? And that's a torus as well. So that's interesting. Or I could be talking bollocks. For instance, a hologram is a tiny pixel. A tiny pixel of a hologram is known to contain the entirety of the rest of the hologram. Here's some proof. Every part of a hologram contains the image of the whole object. For every viewing angle, you see the image in a different perspective as you would a real object. Each piece of a hologram contains a particular perspective of the image, but it includes the entire object. Ooh! That means that this world, if it's a video game, could be a holographic video game, because it's projected and it's 2D, but it appears to us to be 3D. Does that make sense? Just like when you put a VR headset on, the images in that video game inside the VR headset are 2D. They're two-dimensional images, but they appear as 3D because it's just perspective. So yeah. Quote, galaxies north of our own are moving away from us faster than the galaxies to the south. Galaxies to the east and west of us are more distant. The energy that produced the matter that makes up the universe we presently enjoy will turn back in on itself eventually. Its trajectory is ovoid, don't know what that is, also known as the cosmic egg. As it curls back in on itself, it enters a black hole, goes through a densely packed energy nucleus, and then gets spat out the other side of a white hole and begins the process again. Blimey, that is deep, man. That's so fucking motherfucking deep. I've been smoking my doobies like Scooby-Doo and his doobie-doobie-doo. Kind of sounds like a reboot, doesn't it, all that? Like the energy curls back in on itself, enters a black hole and restarts. Sounds like the video game's just restarting itself. You complete it and it goes back round. Also, this torus thing sounds a bit like the symbol for infinity, doesn't it? Incidentally, the symbol for infinity is the same symbol that is now what Facebook, aka Meta is using the infinity symbol as their logo, and Meta is short for metaverse. Facebook wants to start the next metaverse. The next metaverse will probably be the next simulation that we live inside. It's kind of fucking inevitable because Facebook is the only company that can afford to invest, something like $5 billion a year for the last 5 years into the next metaverse. It's fucking inevitable. Imagine that. Mark Zuckerberg is the moderator of the next simulation. We're fucked. Mind you, I don't think anyone's going to jack into a metaverse run by Mark fucking Zuckerberg, to be honest, because he's fucking android-looking twat. Quote, the takeaway is that human consciousness brought to a sufficiently altered, focused state could obtain information about the past, present and future, since they all live in the universal hologram simultaneously. Ooh, that's interesting. This could be where we get the idea of people remembering their past lives. Because people can do that. Mind you, I think a lot of these past life regressors are kind of charlatans because they always make you think everyone's bloody Napoleon or, some king or from Egypt or something. And it's like no one was ever a bloody Chinese peasant, or some poor sod from Mozambique in 1283, When you go into this state that the author described, it's akin to a kind of deep meditation, which is very similar to what people go into when they remember their past lives. Now, again, that could be nonsense, but I think it's a nice theory to look at. It reminds me of that old joke from Only Fools and Horses when Rodney says, if reincarnation does exist, knowing my luck, I'll come back as me. I love that joke. Quote, Wayne reasons that our all-reaching consciousness eventually participates in an all-knowing infinite continuum, i.e. we carry on. Long after we depart the space-time dimension and the hologram each of us perceives is snuffed out, our consciousness continues, reassuring in a way. This is what I wrote about that. This is basically what we've been talking about on this channel, that there is no such thing as death, just a continuation of the real you, what we call the real player, what I call the real player. That's my thing, so, Anyone who uses that can fuck off. Trademarked. Just like the Buddhists talk about the reincarnation, as do other religions, that's why many Buddhist monks take themselves away from this world into a life of introspection and solitude and quiet to achieve what they call nirvana. Nirvana is where you aim to achieve a level of consciousness such is that it will stop the cycle of reincarnation. Because they know that this video game we call life, or at the earth level, at this time is one of the hardest settings. I say it's one of the hardest settings. It's not as hard as it would have been 50 years ago, or 100 years ago, or 200 years ago, or 500 years ago. At the moment, it's pretty fucking easy, isn't it? Even though, yes, we have different problems, it's different. The Buddhists, by going through nirvana, are basically wanting out of reincarnating back into this bloody hellhole, as they see it. By meditating and achieving a higher level of consciousness, they can stop reincarnating as players on Earth. Anyway, the author himself alludes to the following, quote, he cites multiple belief systems that have established identical findings. These include the Tibetan Shug, can't read that, the Hindu heaven of Indra, the Hebrew mystical philosophy, and the Christian concept of the Trinity, all the Matrix Trinity. Here he seems to be more interested in hammering home the theoretical underpinnings that make the Gateway experience possible rather than the practical possibilities promised by the Gateway tapes. I mean, I probably butchered this whole report, but I'll skip through the different chapters to find the interesting bits. It's bloody longer than a religious text. This quote is actually from page 24 of the 26-page report. I quote, I'll do it in an American accent so you can tell I'm doing it differently. So you can tell that this is a quote. This is so because in order to attain self-consciousness, the consciousness of the... I'm not going to do that, it's fucking ridiculous. Quote, this is so because in order to attain self-consciousness, the consciousness of the Absolute must project a hologram of itself and then perceive it. That hologram is a mirror image of the Absolute in infinity. Still exists outside time and space, but is one step removed from the Absolute and is the actual agent of all creation, all reality, and the eternal thought or concept of self, which results from this self-consciousness, serves the... The next page, page 25, is actually missing from the report. It got redacted or pulled out because they don't want anyone to know anymore when it got released. And so they have all these juicy bits that were left out, that our reality is actually a video game using holographic, light to project this reality to us. And it says here, right, the consciousness of the Absolute, aka God, must project a hologram of itself and then perceive it, which means that we are God. God is in us. A piece of God is existing in every single one of us and experiencing the world out of our eyes. Eyes are the window to the soul. Soul, the Holy Trinity, is God up here, there. Then there's your soul. Then there's you in your meat body. All three are connected. The Holy Trinity. See what I mean? Because it says that here. The Absolute. That hologram is a mirror image of the Absolute in infinity. Still exists outside time and space, but is one step removed from the Absolute, aka the Absolute is God up here. One step removed is the soul, stepping into a player, you see. So yeah, my brain turned to noodles as well after looking into all of this. So let me get rid of that. Bloody interesting though, wasn't it?